The bus station reeked of exhaust fumes and stale coffee, the morning air thick with humidity that clung to skin like a warning. 22-year-old James Mitchell stood at the edge of the terminal, his worn sneakers, soles peeling, laces frayed, planted on cracked concrete that had seen 1,000 departures. In his hand, he clutched $11.37. Every penny he owned. The exact fare to the Grandview Corporation headquarters across the city, where a single interview could change everything. His mother's words from this morning still echoed in his ears. She'd left for her housekeeping shift at the Preston estate before dawn, her hands already raw from bleach. Her voice hoarse but determined. "You show them what you're made of, baby. Show them we're not invisible." James checked his phone, 8:47 a.m. The interview was at 10:30. He had 1 hour and 43 minutes to cross a city designed to keep people like him on the margins. Then he heard it. A woman's sob, sharp and broken, cutting through the diesel rumble of idling buses. She sat on a metal bench 15 feet away, her body folded inward, shoulders shaking with the kind of crying that comes from a place beyond tears. Mid-40s, perhaps. Her clothes told a story James knew by heart, a blazer too thin for the season, slacks with a repaired seam along one leg, shoes polished carefully but years past their prime. Her purse lay open on her lap, its contents spilled, a few coins, a crushed granola bar, a hospital wristband. No one else stopped. Commuters flowed around her like water around a stone, their eyes trained forward, earbuds in, faces set in that practiced urban blindness James recognized too well. The woman's hands trembled as she tried to gather the scattered coins, her breath coming in shallow gasps. James felt his chest tighten. He knew that sound, had heard his mother make it when the landlord raised their rent again, when the electricity got shut off, when she thought he was asleep and let herself finally break. He looked down at the bills in his hand. $11.37. His entire future folded into worn currency. The bus to Grandview pulled up with a hydraulic hiss, its door opening like a mouth. The driver called out, "Route 47, express to Financial District. Last morning run." James's feet stayed rooted. His heart hammered against his ribs. The interview packet his mother had printed at the library, using the last of her library card's free print allowance, pressed against his side through the thin fabric of his backpack. 6 months of applications. 214 rejections. This was the first yes. The woman's sobbing grew quieter, more desperate, the sound of someone drowning in silence. James walked toward her. His voice came out softer than intended. "Are you all right?" She looked up, her face blotchy and swollen, eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion that went deeper than sleeplessness. For a moment, she seemed unable to speak, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. "My daughter," she finally whispered. "St. Mary's Hospital. Emergency surgery. I was supposed to be there 2 hours ago, but her voice cracked. "I lost my wallet somewhere between home and here. I have nothing. Not even bus fare. She's alone and she's scared, and I promised I'd be there and Her hands covered her face. The hospital wristband on her purse read, "Patient family, ICU access, St. Mary's Medical Center." St. Mary's was across town. 4 to 5 minutes by bus. $23 round trip. James felt the weight of the money in his hand. He thought of his mother's hands, cracked and bleeding from scrubbing other people's floors. He thought of the Grandview interview, the fresh press shirt she'd bought from Goodwill, the way she'd smiled when she handed it to him. "You're going to make us proud, baby." He thought of this woman's daughter, alone in a hospital bed, waiting for her mother. Behind him, the bus driver called out, "Last call for Route 47. Departing in 30 seconds. James held out the $11.37. "Hey," he said. "Take it. Get to your daughter." The woman stared at the money like it was written in a language she couldn't read. I can't. This is." "Please." James pressed the bills into her palm, folded her fingers around them. "Your daughter needs you. That's more important than anything else right now." Before we continue this story, I'd like to take a moment to connect with you all watching. Would you do me a favor and comment below where you're watching from? Whether you're tuning in from New York, Los Angeles, somewhere in between, or anywhere else in the world, I want to know. Drop your city or state in the comments. It helps me understand this incredible community we're building together. The bus doors closed with a final hiss. Route 47 pulled away, taking James's future with it. The woman looked up at him, tears streaming fresh now, but different, clearer somehow. I don't understand. Why would you? You don't even know me. James thought of his mother, of all the times strangers had looked through her like she was invisible, of all the doors closed in their faces, of all the ways the world reminded them daily that they didn't matter. Because someone needed help, he said simply. And I could help. The woman stood, her hand clutching the money like a lifeline. She opened her mouth to speak, but James was already turning away, his empty hands hanging at his sides, his chest tight with something that felt like both loss and lightness. He didn't see the way the woman's expression changed, from gratitude to something sharper, more focused. Didn't notice how her tears stopped as suddenly as if a switch had been flipped. Didn't catch the way her eyes followed him as he walked toward the exit, or how she pulled out a phone, sleek, expensive, nothing like the cheap prepaid he'd assumed she'd have, and made a call. What he did see was the job posting on the terminal's community board. Dishwasher needed. Night shift. $15 an hour. Start immediately. James took a photo with his cracked phone screen, sent it to his mother with a message. Interview didn't work out. Got something better. Home by midnight. Love you. He didn't tell her about the $11. Didn't mention the woman or the hospital or the choice that had felt like no choice at all. Outside, the city roared with indifferent life. James Mitchell had just given away his last chance at escaping poverty. He had no idea he'd just given it to the one person who could change everything. The dishwashing job at Murphy's Diner materialized exactly as desperate employment always did, immediate, grueling, and just barely enough. James started that same night, his hands plunging into scalding water and grease for 7 hours straight, his back screaming by hour 3, his feet numb by hour 5. $15 an hour minus taxes meant about $12.50 in his pocket. $87 for 7 hours of work that left his skin raw and his shoulders burning. He did the math on the bus ride home at 2 a.m. Rent was $800 monthly. Utilities another $150. Food, if they stretched every meal to its absolute limit, maybe $200. His mother's housekeeping brought in about $1,400 a month. Combined, they'd make it. Barely. Again. 3 days later, the call came. James was elbow deep in a sink full of breakfast dishes, the morning rush having left Murphy's kitchen looking like a war zone, when his phone buzzed against his hip. Unknown number. He let it go to voicemail, too exhausted to care about whatever scam was trying to reach him now. The voicemail notification appeared. He ignored it through lunch prep, through the afternoon lull, through the dinner rush. It wasn't until his shift ended at 10 p.m. that curiosity got the better of him. The message was 37 seconds long. A woman's voice, professional and precise. Mr. Mitchell, this is Jennifer Torres calling from Grandview Corporation's executive office. We're reaching out regarding your missed interview last Monday. We'd like to reschedule at your earliest convenience. Additionally, our CEO has requested to meet with you personally. Please return this call at any time, day or night. This number reaches me directly. James listened to it 3 times, his heart rate climbing with each replay. Grandview didn't reschedule missed interviews. He knew this because he'd researched the company obsessively for 2 months before applying. They received an average of 3,000 applications monthly for entry-level positions. Missing an interview was an automatic disqualification. There were no second chances in that world. And the CEO wanted to meet with him personally? He called back from the diner's back alley, the phone slippery in his still damp hands. Jennifer Torres answered on the first ring. Mr. Mitchell, thank you for returning my call. I don't understand, James said. I missed the interview. I thought your application materials were exceptional. Our CEO believes you deserve an opportunity to present yourself in person. A pause, deliberate and weighted. Would you be available tomorrow at 2 p.m.? Tomorrow was Saturday. James worked the breakfast and lunch shifts on Saturdays, his moneymaker days, tips included. Missing both would cost him about $140. But this was Grandview Corporation, Fortune 500. The kind of company that didn't look twice at people from his neighborhood, let alone call them back after a no-show. I'll be there, he said. That night, he told his mother. She was soaking her feet in Epsom salt, her housekeeping uniform already laid out for tomorrow's early shift at the Preston estate. When he explained about the call, about the personal CEO meeting, her eyes went wide. "Baby, this is it. This is what we've been praying for." "I don't understand why they called me back," James admitted. "Companies like that don't. Maybe they saw something in you that others missed." She squeezed his hand, her palm rough with calluses. "Maybe someone finally looked past the address on your application and saw the person." James wanted to believe that. But something about the call felt off, too convenient, too perfectly timed, too generous for a world that had never been generous to him before. The next day, he put on the Goodwill dress shirt and his only pair of slacks. His mother had pressed them both the night before, the iron leaving sharp creases that made him look almost professional. Almost. The bus ride to Grandview's headquarters took 53 minutes. James counted every stop, his stomach a knot of anxiety and hope tangled so tight he couldn't tell them apart. The building rose 47 stories into a sky scrubbed clean by money. Glass and steel, reflecting clouds and ambition in equal measure. James had seen it from a distance a dozen times, everyone in the city had, but standing at its base felt like standing at the foot of a mountain designed specifically to remind people like him how small they were. The lobby made him want to turn around. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine. A waterfall installation running down one entire wall. Security guards in suits nicer than anything he'd ever owned. People moving with the casual confidence of those who'd never doubted they belonged. James approached the reception desk, his sneakers squeaking on the marble. The receptionist looked up, late 20s, immaculate makeup, a name tag that read Kristen in elegant script. Her smile was professional and automatic until her eyes took in his clothes, his shoes, his presence. The smile cooled by several degrees. "Can I help you?" Polite, but distant. The tone people used with delivery drivers and janitors. "I have a 2 p.m. appointment. James Mitchell." "With," he paused, the words feeling absurd in his mouth. "With the CEO." Kristen's expression flickered. Surprise, then skepticism. She typed something into her computer, her manicured nails clicking against keys. The clicking stopped. Her eyebrows rose. "Mr. Mitchell." "Yes. You expected." The professional warmth returned, but different now, confused, uncertain. "I'll let Ms. Torres know you've arrived. Please have a seat." She gestured to a waiting area furnished with chairs that probably cost more than his mother's monthly salary. James sat on the edge of one, his back rigid, his hands clasped to keep them from trembling. Other people waited nearby, all in expensive suits, leather briefcases, the casual armor of wealth. They glanced at him, their eyes doing quick calculations, placing him somewhere in the hierarchy of staff. Courier? Maybe. Maintenance. Nobody looked at him like he was there for the same reason they were. At 2:07, a woman emerged from the elevator bank. Late 30s, Southeast Asian features, wearing a charcoal suit that moved like water when she walked. She scanned the waiting area, her gaze passing over the suited professionals and landing on James. "Mr. Mitchell." He stood too quickly, nearly knocked over his chair. "Yes, that's me. Jennifer Torres, executive assistant to Ms. Richardson. Thank you for coming." She extended her hand. James shook it, aware of his calluses, aware of the dish soap still embedded under his fingernails despite 20 minutes of scrubbing. If Jennifer noticed, she gave no indication. "Please, follow me." They entered an elevator that required a key card to operate. Jennifer swiped hers and pressed the button for the 47th floor. The top floor. The elevator rose smoothly, silently. James watched the numbers climb, each one marking a distance further from anything he'd ever known. "I have to ask," he said, because the silence was crushing and the question was eating him alive. "Why did you call me back? Why would the CEO want to meet with me?" Jennifer glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Ms. Richardson believes in recognizing potential wherever it appears. Your application demonstrated exceptional analytical skills, innovative thinking, and a depth of understanding about our company's mission that impressed her." It was a good answer, a practiced answer, but it didn't explain the personal meeting, the impossible second chance, the sudden interest in someone who'd missed the first opportunity. The elevator doors opened. The 47th floor was nothing like the lobby. Quieter, more intimate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the entire city. A sprawling landscape of ambition and failure, wealth and poverty. All of it visible from this height, but none of it quite real. Jennifer led him down a hallway lined with abstract art that James suspected was worth more than his childhood home. They stopped at a set of double doors, dark wood, polished handles, the kind of entrance that made you straighten your spine involuntarily. Jennifer knocked once, then opened the door. "Ms. Richardson, Mr. Mitchell is here. Send him in." The voice was familiar. James couldn't place why. He stepped into an office the size of his entire apartment. Mall windows. A desk that looked hand-carved. Bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes and industry awards. And behind the desk, rising to her feet with a smile that was knowing and warm and impossible, the woman from the bus station. James's breath stopped. She looked different. Hair styled professionally instead of disheveled. Makeup applied with expertise instead of running with tears. Wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than his mother earned in 3 months. But the face was unmistakable. The eyes were the same. "Hello, James," she said. "I'm Evelyn Richardson, CEO of Grandview Corporation. I believe we've met before." Behind James, the door clicked shut. "Before we go any further, I want to ask something of you all watching right now. If this story is connecting with you, if you're feeling the weight of this moment like I am, would you take just a second to hit that like button? Drop a comment telling me what you think is about to happen. Share this with someone who needs to see that kindness still matters in this world. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and check the description box below for more stories like this one. Stories about real people, real struggles, and the moments that change everything. Your support means the world and helps us keep bringing these stories to life. Now, back to James, standing frozen in an office 47 floors above the streets he'd walked all his life, staring at the woman he'd given his last $11 to. The woman who, it turned out, had never needed them at all. James's mind refused to process what his eyes were telling him. The woman from the bus station, crying, desperate, clutching scattercoins, stood before him now radiating the unmistakable authority of someone who'd spent decades commanding rooms far more important than this one. The transformation wasn't just clothing and composure. It was the weight of power itself, settling around her shoulders like a cloak he'd simply failed to notice before. "Please, sit." Evelyn gestured to a chair across from her desk, leather, ergonomic, probably worth more than his monthly wages. James remained standing, his legs locked, his voice caught somewhere between confusion and something darker. "I don't understand." "I know. That's why I asked you here." Evelyn moved around the desk, not sitting herself, eliminating the barrier between them. The afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows caught the subtle gray in her hair, the fine lines around her eyes. She looked human again, not like the broken woman from the terminal, but not like an untouchable executive either. Just real. "The woman at the bus station," James said slowly, his brain finally catching up. "The crying. The hospital. Your daughter." His stomach dropped. Was any of it real? Evelyn's expression shifted, something like pain crossing her features. "My daughter is very real. Her name is Caroline. She's 17 years old. And yes, she was in the hospital that morning." James felt the floor tilt slightly. "But I wasn't broke. I wasn't lost. And I wasn't desperate. At least, not in the way you thought." Evelyn moved to the windows, her back to him now, her silhouette framed against the city sprawl. "What I was, Mr. Mitchell, was testing a theory." The words hit James like cold water. Testing. "For the past 6 months, I've been conducting an experiment. Unorthodox, perhaps unethical by some standards, but necessary." She turned back to face him. "I've been trying to understand something fundamental about human nature, about the people who work for this company, about the people I hire, about what truly drives someone to act when they believe no one is watching." James's hands curled into fists at his sides. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thinner. "You were testing me. 11 times, I've done this. Placed myself in public spaces and circumstances that suggested need. Dressed to blend with those society overlooks. created scenarios where someone might choose to help or choose to ignore. Evelyn's voice remained steady, clinical almost, but her eyes held something else. Something that looked like genuine emotion. 10 times, people walked past. Made assumptions based on my appearance. Decided my problems weren't their concern. One man actually laughed. James couldn't speak. His mind was reeling, trying to reconcile the woman who'd sobbed on a bench with the executive standing before him, trying to understand whether he should feel honored or humiliated. You were the 11th person I tested, Evelyn continued. And you were the first to stop. The first to ask if I was all right. The first to offer help even though it cost you something real, something you couldn't afford to lose. The interview, James whispered. You knew I'd miss it. I knew you had an appointment at Grandview that morning. Your application had already crossed my desk. I review every potential hire for our management training program personally. When I saw your background, your qualifications despite your circumstances, your recommendations from professors who wrote that you were the most determined student they'd ever taught, I wanted to meet you. But I wanted to meet the real you. Not the version that shows up in a borrowed suit trying to say the right things. Evelyn pulled something from her desk drawer, a folder, worn at the edges. She handed it to James. Inside were papers. Documents. At the top, a photograph so old it had faded to sepia tones. A man in military uniform, young, smiling, standing in front of a building James didn't recognize. The photograph was labeled, Sergeant Robert Mitchell, 1968. James's grandfather. Dead before James was born. I don't. He looked up at Evelyn, completely lost. Turned to the next page. He did. It was a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age, dated August 1968. The headline read, Local Soldier Saves Family from House Fire. The article described how Sergeant Robert Mitchell, home on leave, had pulled a family of 4 from a burning house in Philadelphia. 2 adults, 2 children. The father had suffered severe burns. The mother and children survived unharmed thanks to Robert's quick action. James's hands trembled as he read. His mother had mentioned his grandfather's military service, his bravery, but never this. Never anything this specific. The father who was burned that day, Evelyn said quietly, was my father, Thomas Richardson. The children were my brother and me. I was 6 years old. The folder slipped from James's fingers, papers scattering across the expensive carpet. My father spent 3 months in the hospital, Evelyn continued, her voice thick now with memory. He survived, but barely. The fire damage to his lungs haunted him for the rest of his life. He died when I was 23, complications from smoke inhalation that never fully healed. She paused, swallowed hard. Your grandfather saved our lives, James. And he did it without hesitation, without asking who we were or whether we could repay him. He just acted because people needed help. James felt his knees weaken. He sank into the chair he'd refused earlier, his mind struggling to connect the dots across decades, across generations, across the impossible coincidence that had brought him to this office. After the fire, my father tried to find Robert, tried to thank him properly, to repay him somehow. But Robert had already shipped back overseas. Vietnam. My father wrote letters, made calls, spent years trying to track him down. Evelyn's voice cracked slightly. By the time he found the right Robert Mitchell, your grandfather had passed away. Heart attack at 49. Too young. Too soon. I didn't know, James whispered. My mother never told me any of this. She might not have known the details. These things get lost in family histories, reduced to simple stories that miss the weight of what actually happened. Evelyn knelt down, gathering the scattered papers, her movements slow and deliberate. My father made me promise something before he died. He made me swear that if I ever had the chance to repay the Mitchell family, to honor the debt we owed, I would do it without hesitation, just like Robert had done for us. She handed the papers back to James, her eyes meeting his directly. I've been looking for you for 3 years, James. Since I became CEO and finally had the resources to conduct a proper search. There are a lot of Mitchells in the world. A lot of Robert Mitchells, even. But when your application came across my desk and I saw your background, your mother's name, Elizabeth Mitchell, daughter of Robert, I knew. So the bus station. James's voice was hollow. Was real. My daughter Caroline is 17 and she does have health problems, nothing life-threatening, thank God, but serious enough that I spend more time in hospitals than any parent wants to. That morning, she'd had a procedure. Minor, but she was scared and asked me to be there. I was on my way when I saw you at the terminal. Evelyn smiled sadly. I wasn't lying about being a mother who wanted to be with her child. I was just testing whether you were the person I hoped you were. Whether Robert Mitchell's grandson carried the same character his grandfather had shown my family decades ago. James sat in silence, the weight of revelation pressing down on him from all sides. The test, the setup, the manipulation, it all felt wrong. But underneath that wrongness was something else. Something that felt like fate, like the universe reaching across time to close a circle that had been left open for too long. I gave you money I needed, he said finally. Money that cost me the interview. That cost me everything, Evelyn finished. You gave up everything to help someone you thought needed it more. That's exactly what your grandfather did. That's exactly the kind of person I want working for this company. That's exactly the kind of person who can change what Grandview becomes. She returned to her desk, pulled out another folder, thicker this time, official looking. This is a contract offer for our executive management training program. 2 years, full salary and benefits from day one. $85,000 annually to start. Upon completion, guaranteed placement in a senior management role. Company housing assistance. Full health care for you and your family. Educational reimbursement if you want to pursue an MBA. James stared at the folder like it might explode. Additionally, Evelyn continued, there's a separate agreement. A scholarship fund established in your grandfather's name. Full ride to any university in the country for any descendant of Robert Mitchell. That includes you, any siblings, and any children you might have someday. My father wanted this set up before he died. I'm finally able to honor that wish. The numbers stopped making sense. The words blurred together. James felt tears building behind his eyes and forced them back through pure willpower. Why? He asked. Why all of this? You could have just offered me a job. You didn't need to. Yes, I did. Evelyn's voice turned firm. Because I needed to know you were him. Not genetically, I knew that from your application. But in character. In choice. In the way you move through the world. I needed to know that when given the choice between your own advancement and helping someone else, you'd choose kindness. Because that's who we need leading this company into the future. That's who will make decisions that matter when I'm gone. She placed the contract on the desk between them. Your grandfather saved my family from fire. You saved me from losing faith that people like him still exist. Evelyn extended her hand. Welcome to Grandview, James. Welcome home. James looked at her hand, at the contract, at the photograph of his grandfather smiling in his uniform. He thought about his mother, scrubbing floors in someone else's mansion. He thought about the $11 he'd given away without hesitation. He thought about all the closed doors, all the rejections, all the times he'd been invisible. He shook Evelyn's hand. And everything changed. 6 months transformed James Mitchell's world with a velocity that left him breathless every morning when he woke up. The executive training program at Grandview wasn't simply a job. It was an immersion into a universe he'd only ever observed from the outside, a systematic dismantling of every assumption poverty had taught him about what was possible. The company apartment came first. 32nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, a kitchen his mother cried in when she first saw it. Not from sadness but from the sheer impossibility made real. Granite countertops, appliances that worked, space enough to breathe. James had moved them both out of their old neighborhood within 2 weeks of signing the contract. His mother retired from housekeeping the same day, her hands finally able to heal from decades of bleach and hard water. She spent the first month of retirement just sitting at the apartment windows, watching the city she'd cleaned for 30 years from a height she'd never imagined reaching. But the training itself was what changed James from the inside out. Evelyn Richardson didn't simply hand him a position. She demanded he earn it through competence, through learning every aspect of Grandview's operations from infrastructure to ethics. He rotated through departments, finance, operations, human resources, marketing, legal compliance. Each rotation revealed new complexity, new challenges, new opportunities to prove he belonged. The other trainees, all from Ivy League schools, all from families with generational wealth, treated him with initial skepticism that gradually transformed into respect. Not because James pretended to be something he wasn't, but because he outworked them. Every presentation sharper, every analysis deeper, every solution more innovative because he understood something they'd never had to learn, how to create value from nothing. By month 4, James was leading projects. By month 5, he was presenting to senior leadership. By month 6, Evelyn assigned him his first major initiative, revamping Grandview's hiring practices to identify talent in unconventional places. Find more people like you, she'd said simply. Find the ones everyone else overlooks. It was during this work that James discovered the full scope of what Evelyn had been doing for years. The bus station test wasn't an isolated experiment. It was part of a larger philosophy she'd been quietly implementing across Grandview's culture. She'd created partnerships with community colleges, established mentorship programs for first-generation professionals, and mandated that every department interview at least 3 candidates from non-traditional backgrounds for any open position. The resistance had been significant. Board members questioned the approach. Department heads complained about qualification gaps. But Evelyn had held firm, using her authority as CEO to push through changes that made Grandview's leadership increasingly uncomfortable. They are afraid of disruption, she told James during one of their weekly mentorship sessions. Afraid that if we start valuing potential over pedigree, they'll have to acknowledge that their own positions aren't quite as earned as they'd like to believe. James understood that fear intimately. He saw it in every boardroom he entered, in every presentation where someone's eyes flickered with surprise that the kid from the poor neighborhood could speak their language, analyze their data, challenge their assumptions. One particular board meeting in month 7 crystallized everything. James presented his hiring initiative proposal, a comprehensive program partnering with urban high schools, offering internships to students regardless of GPA if they demonstrated creativity, persistence, and character. The program would cost Grandview $8 million annually, significant, but modest compared to their recruitment budget for Ivy League campuses. The pushback was immediate and vicious. "We're not a charity," one board member stated flatly. "We're a Fortune 500 company. We need the best talent, not the most heartwarming stories." James had remained calm, presented data showing that non-traditional hires consistently showed higher retention rates, greater company loyalty, and more innovative problem-solving than their conventional counterparts. He showed examples from other companies, demonstrated IOI projections, addressed every concern with precision. But the real turning point came when Evelyn stood. "I want to share something," she said, her voice cutting through the murmuring dissent. 40 years ago, a man pulled my family from a burning building. He was a soldier home, on leave. He didn't know us. We couldn't pay him. He had no strategic reason to risk his life for ours. But he did it anyway because he saw people who needed help and he had the capacity to provide it." The boardroom fell silent. "That man's grandson is standing in front of you today. And he's not here because I felt sorry for him. He's not here because of some misguided sense of social responsibility. He's here because he demonstrated the exact qualities we claim to value in this company: initiative, analytical thinking, leadership, and integrity. He proved it by giving away his last dollar to help someone he believed needed it more." Evelyn's gaze swept the room. "If you're uncomfortable with that, if you believe talent only exists in zip codes you recognize, then you're not protecting this company's standards. You're protecting your own comfort. And that's precisely the kind of thinking that will make Grandview irrelevant in 10 years." The vote passed. 9-3. James's program launched the following quarter. But not every change came smoothly. 2 senior executives resigned within weeks of the hiring program's announcement, both citing philosophical differences with company direction. Their departures sent ripples through Grandview's culture, some relieved, some anxious, all aware that the company was transforming into something different than what it had been. James's relationship with his mother deepened during these months in unexpected ways. With financial pressure removed, they had space to simply be together. She attended every one of his presentations, sitting in the back of conference rooms, watching her son command spaces she'd only ever entered to clean. One evening, over dinner in their new apartment, she told him about his grandfather. The real stories, not the sanitized versions from childhood. How Robert Mitchell had grown up in Jim Crow, Georgia, how he'd joined the military to escape poverty, how he'd sent money home every month even when he had nothing. How he died of a heart attack at 49, his body worn out from a lifetime of working 3 jobs to keep his family fed. He would have been so proud of you, baby, she said, her eyes bright. So damn proud. James thought about that constantly. The grandfather he'd never met, whose single act of bravery had created a debt that spanned generations, that had ultimately lifted James out of poverty he'd thought was permanent. The weight of that legacy pressed on him daily, not as burden but as responsibility. By month 9, James's hiring program had brought in its first cohort, 15 young people from underserved communities, all brilliant, all hungry, all carrying stories similar to his own. He mentored them personally, teaching them not just professional skills, but how to navigate a world designed to make them feel out of place. One of them, a 19-year-old named Terrence from the South Side, reminded James so much of himself it was painful. Same guarded expressions, same hyper-awareness of how his clothes looked compared to others, same fierce determination mixed with barely concealed terror that he'd fail and prove all the doubters right. How do you do it? Terrence asked him once, after a particularly brutal day where another trainee had made a comment about diversity hires. You remember why you're here, James said. Not because someone felt sorry for you. Not because of quotas or optics. You're here because you earned it. You're here because you have something valuable that this company needs. And if anyone suggests otherwise, you make them regret it by being so damn good they can't ignore you. It was Evelyn's advice, filtered through James's experience. It was his grandfather's legacy, passed forward. It was the only answer he had. By the end of James's first year, Grandview's culture had shifted noticeably. The new hires brought fresh perspectives, challenged old assumptions, asked questions that made senior leadership uncomfortable in productive ways. Retention improved. Innovation metrics increased. Employee satisfaction scores rose across every demographic. The program's success attracted media attention. Business journals wrote articles about Grandview's radical approach to talent acquisition. Evelyn was invited to speak at conferences. James found himself interviewed for podcasts, asked to explain how he designed the initiative. He always credited Evelyn, always mentioned his grandfather, always tried to deflect attention back to the program participants themselves, the kids who'd taken the chance, who'd proved everyone wrong, who were changing what a Fortune 500 company could look like. But privately, late at night in the apartment that still felt too big, too nice, too impossible, James wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. Was he an exception or evidence of potential wasted everywhere? How many people like him never got this chance? How many Robert Mitchells died at 49 without anyone ever knowing what they'd sacrificed? And more troubling, was his success simply another form of the same system that had created his poverty in the first place, a narrative that allowed people to believe the rare escape proved the system worked, rather than exposing how broken it was? Evelyn addressed this directly during one of their mentorship sessions. What you're feeling is guilt, she said. Survivor's guilt. It's common among people who escape circumstances they know others are still trapped in. But here's what you need to understand. Your success doesn't erase anyone else's struggle. It does, however, give you a platform to change the systems that create those struggles. Use it. So James did. He expanded the hiring program. He pushed for partnerships with more schools, more communities. He advocated for policy changes in Grandview's supply chain, ensuring contracts went to minority-owned businesses. He used his position to open doors he'd once believed were locked forever. And slowly, door by door, the company changed. If you've made it this far in the story, I want to ask you to do something for me. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances. Drop a comment about someone who changed your life by believing in you. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that their circumstances don't define their potential. Subscribe if you want more stories about real people making real change. And don't forget to check the description box below for more inspiring stories like this one. Your engagement helps these stories reach the people who need them most. At the 13-month mark, Evelyn called James into her office. The same office where he'd first learned the truth about his grandfather, about the test, about the impossible debt being repaid. "I'm announcing my retirement," she said without preamble. "In 6 months. The board wants me to stay through the next fiscal year, but I'm done. I've been CEO for 15 years. That's enough." James felt the floor shift beneath him. "Who's taking over?" Evelyn smiled. "The board will decide. But I'm recommending you." The words didn't process. "I've been here barely a year." "You've been preparing for this your entire life. You just didn't know it." She handed him another folder, thinner than the contract had been, heavier somehow. "This is the Robert Mitchell Memorial Fund. Fully endowed, $800 million. It will provide scholarships, housing assistance, and mentorship for first-generation students in perpetuity. I want you to oversee it." James opened the folder, so the foundation documents, so his grandfather's name on every page, so the scope of what Evelyn had built in secret, using her wealth to create opportunity that would outlive them both. "Why me?" he asked. "Why not someone with more experience, more?" "Because you know what it costs," Evelyn interrupted. "You know what it means to have nothing and choose kindness anyway. You know that leadership isn't about having power, it's about using power to lift others. That's what your grandfather taught me. That's what you'll teach this company." James looked at the documents, at the photographs of his grandfather, at Evelyn's face, older now, tired, but satisfied in a way that suggested she'd completed something important. "Thank you," he said, the words inadequate but sincere. "Don't thank me. Honor it. Build on it. Make sure the next kid who gives away his last $11 doesn't have to wait 40 years for justice." James promised he would. And he meant it. 18 months after James Mitchell walked into Grandview Corporation for the first time, he stood on the 47th floor again, but this time in Evelyn's former office. His office now, watching dawn break over a city that looked different than it had before. Not because the city had changed, but because his ability to affect it had. The board's decision to name him CEO at 24 had been controversial. 3 board members resigned in protest. Industry analysts called it reckless and symbolic posturing. Competitors circled, sensing vulnerability. Stock prices dipped for 2 weeks before stabilizing. But Evelyn had prepared him. 6 months of intensive transition planning, hundreds of meetings with stakeholders, careful choreography of every announcement. She'd made it clear to the board, accept her choice or lose her endorsement entirely. Given her reputation and Grandview's performance under her leadership, they'd ultimately capitulated. Now, 3 months into his tenure as the youngest CEO of a Fortune 500 company in history, James was proving them right to gamble on him. The hiring program he'd pioneered had expanded to 4 to 7 cities. Grandview now partnered with 200 high schools, 30 community colleges, and 15 reentry programs for formerly incarcerated individuals. The company's workforce demographics had shifted measurably, not through quotas, but through genuine outreach to talent pools everyone else ignored. More importantly, the culture had transformed. Empathy became a leadership competency. Community impact became a performance metric. Profit remained essential, but purpose became equally valued. The Robert Mitchell Memorial Fund had disbursed its first scholarship 6 months ago. 83 students, all first generation, all from backgrounds similar to James's own. He'd met each one personally, shaken their hands, told them about his grandfather and the fire and the debt that had brought them together. One student, a 17-year-old girl named Keisha from Detroit, had cried during their meeting. "My mom cleans houses," she'd whispered. "Just like yours did. And now I'm going to MIT because of this. Because someone decades ago did something kind without expecting anything back." James thought about that constantly. The ripples of single actions extending across time, touching lives that would never know the original source. His grandfather pulling strangers from fire. James giving money to a woman at a bus terminal. Each choice creating waves that pushed outward, changing trajectories in ways impossible to predict or measure. The business results validated the approach. Grandview's innovation metrics had increased by 47% year-over-year. Employee retention hit record highs. Customer satisfaction scores climbed as the company's culture of empathy extended outward into how they treated clients. Stock price recovered and exceeded previous peaks. The board members who'd stayed grudgingly admitted James had been right. The ones who'd resigned sent quiet messages of congratulation through intermediaries, professional enough to acknowledge they'd misjudged. But James's most important work happened outside Grandview's walls. Using his platform as CEO, he'd become an advocate for systemic change. He testified before Congress about poverty and opportunity. He wrote op-eds challenging wealth inequality. He funded research into breaking generational poverty cycles. He used his story not as evidence that the system worked, but as indictment of a system that made stories like his so rare they became newsworthy. Critics accused him of virtue signaling, of using his position for political grandstanding. Supporters called him a model for conscious capitalism. James ignored both labels, focused instead on measurable impact. Policies changed, resources redirected, doors opened. His mother remained his anchor through it all. She attended every major event, sat in on key meetings when he asked her perspective, reminded him constantly who he was before the title and the office and the platform. She'd started volunteering at the same community center where James had spent his childhood, mentoring other single mothers, sharing her story of cleaning houses until her hands bled, and then watching her son become a CEO. Tell them the truth, she'd say to the women who came to her sessions. Tell them that poverty doesn't mean you failed. Tell them that their children are watching how they persist. Tell them that kindness isn't weakness, it's the only thing that matters when everything else is stripped away. One afternoon in late autumn, James received a letter, handwritten, delivered by traditional mail, addressed simply, to the grandson of Robert Mitchell. Inside, a photograph. Black and white, edges worn. A family standing in front of a house, rebuilt after the fire. A man, woman, and 2 children, all smiling. On the back, written in faded ink, thanks to Sergeant Mitchell, 1969. A note accompanied the photo. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Thomas Richardson's son, Evelyn's brother. I was 3 years old when your grandfather saved us. I'm 62 now. I wanted you to know that because of Robert, I got to grow up. I became a teacher. I taught elementary school for 38 years. I estimate I taught about 900 children in my career. Each of them exists in part because your grandfather chose to act. Each of them went on to have their own impact. The ripples of that single choice are incalculable. Thank you for continuing his legacy. David Richardson. James put the letter on his desk, next to the photograph of his grandfather in uniform. He thought about 900 children taught by a man who'd only survived because of one moment of courage. Thought about their children, their students, their patients, their employees. Thought about the geometric expansion of impact from single choices made in single moments. That evening, James visited the old neighborhood. He drove past the apartment where he'd grown up, now condemned and scheduled for demolition. Drove past Murphy's Diner, where he'd washed dishes for $87 a day. Drove past the bus terminal, where he'd given away his last money to a crying woman. The terminal looked the same. Same cracked concrete. Same smell of exhaust and desperation. James parked and walked to the bench where Evelyn had sat, where he'd made the choice that changed everything. A young man sat there now. Early 20s, worn clothes, holding a phone with a cracked screen. He was counting money, bills and change laid out on the bench beside him, his lips moving as he calculated. James almost kept walking, almost got back in his car, and drove back to his apartment 47 stories above the city. Almost treated this moment like the thousands of others he'd witnessed, suffering he acknowledged but didn't engage. Instead, he sat down. You all right? James asked. The young man looked up, startled. His eyes did the same calculation everyone's did when they first saw James. Expensive suit, confident bearing, the markers of someone who belonged in different spaces. Yeah, fine. The young man started gathering his money, defensive and embarrassed. James waited. Didn't move. Didn't leave. I'm trying to get to a job interview, the young man finally said. Across town. Bus fare is $12 and I've got. He counted again. 11:30. I'm 30 cents short and the bus leaves in 10 minutes and this is my 3rd interview this month and I really need this to work out because my mom is sick and we're about to lose our apartment and He stopped, his voice cracking. Sorry, you don't need to hear all that. James pulled out his wallet, removed a $20 bill, handed it over. Take it. Get to your interview. Get the job. Take care of your mom. The young man stared at the money like it might disappear. I can't. I don't know you. I can't pay you back. You don't need to pay me back. You just need to remember this moment. And someday, when you're in a position to help someone else, you do it without hesitation. That's the only payment required. Tears built in the young man's eyes. He took the 20 with shaking hands. Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't know what to say. Say you'll pass it forward. Say you'll remember that someone saw you when you were invisible. Say you'll build a world where people don't have to beg for 30 cents to get to opportunities that might change their lives. The bus pulled up, Route 47, same line James had missed 18 months ago. The young man stood, looked at James one more time with an expression of disbelief and gratitude and hope all mixed together. I will. I promise. He boarded the bus. James watched it pull away, watched it disappear into city traffic, watched another life potentially transformed by a choice that cost him nothing but meant everything to someone else. James's phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. Board meeting in 30 minutes. Review of Q4 projections. He stood, brushed off his suit, walked back to his car. The city moved around him. Millions of people in their own struggles, their own triumphs, their own moments of choice between self-interest and compassion. Each of them capable of being either Robert Mitchell pulling strangers from fire, or the 10 people who'd walked past Evelyn without stopping. Before starting the car, James sent a text to the Robert Mitchell Memorial Fund coordinator, increase the scholarship allocation for next year by 20%. Find the money in my personal CEO compensation. We need to reach more people. The response came immediately. Confirmed. That's an additional $4 million annually. Will impact approximately 200 more students. 200 more lives changed. 200 more families lifted. 200 more chances for someone to prove that poverty isn't permanent, that circumstances aren't destiny, that kindness compounds across generations. James drove back to Grandview. Back to the office on the 47th floor, back to the meetings and decisions and responsibilities that came with leading a Fortune 500 company at 24. But he carried with him the memory of that young man's face, the weight of that $20 bill, the continuation of a cycle his grandfather had started 40 years ago. That evening, after the board meeting and the strategy sessions and the endless emails, James called his mother. Hey baby, she answered, her voice warm and tired. How was your day? I met someone today, James said. At the bus terminal. Gave him money to get to a job interview. His mother was quiet for a moment. Then, just like your grandfather would have done. Just like you taught me to do. Just like anyone should do, she corrected gently. We just live in a world that makes kindness feel rare. Your job is to make it common again. James looked out his office windows at the city below, all those lives, all those struggles, all those opportunities for someone to choose compassion over convenience. I'm trying, Mom. Every day, I'm trying. I know you are, baby. And I'm so proud of you. Not because you're a CEO. Not because you're rich now. But because you're still the kid who gave away his last dollar to help a stranger. Money and power didn't change that. Success didn't change that. You're still him. James felt tears threatening and blinked them back. I hope so. I know so. Now get some rest. Tomorrow you're going to change more lives. And the day after that. And the day after that. Until changing lives is just what this company does. What this world does. They said goodnight. James sat in the darkness of his office, the city lights spreading below him like constellations of human ambition and desperation and hope. His grandfather had pulled 4 people from fire. James had been pulled from poverty by those same flames, burning across generations. Now it was his turn to pull others forward, to break the cycles that trapped people in circumstances they didn't choose and couldn't escape alone. He thought about the young man on the bus, riding toward an interview that might change everything. Thought about Keisha heading to MIT. Thought about the 900 students David Richardson had taught. Thought about the geometric expansion of impact from single moments of choice. The work was infinite. The need was overwhelming. The systems that created poverty and inequality were vast and entrenched and defended by those who benefited from them. But his grandfather had run into a burning building anyway. James had given away his last dollar anyway. And tomorrow, he'd wake up and keep fighting anyway. Because some debts could never be repaid, they could only be passed forward. And the only way to honor those who'd lifted you was to reach back and lift others. Before we end this story, I want to ask you one more time, if this touched you, if you believe in the power of kindness and second chances and breaking cycles of injustice, would you like this video? Comment your thoughts. Share it with someone who needs hope. Subscribe to this channel for more stories like this. And check the description box below for even more inspiring content. Your support helps us reach people who need to know that their circumstances aren't their destiny. James Mitchell gave away his last $11 on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday, he'd been offered a job. By a year later, he was mentoring dozens of others like him. By 18 months, he was running a Fortune 500 company and changing the systems that had almost kept him invisible. Not because he was exceptional, but because someone saw him when he was invisible. Because someone remembered a debt. Because someone chose to turn gratitude into action. And now, every day, he did the same for others. The housemaid's son became a CEO. But more importantly, he became the bridge between what the world was and what it could be. One choice at a time. One life at a time. $1 at a time. Until kindness stopped being rare and became common. Until dignity became universal. Until everyone who'd ever been invisible finally got seen. That was the work. That was the legacy. That was the only thing that mattered.